Okay, in this video I want to explore a subtopic of my recent rereading of Aristotle's Art of Rhetoric that's quite important. And we're reading this in my Intro to Rhetoric course right now. And I hadn't, just over the last few months, I came across the Roberts translation, which I really like. I think it's very clear. Um, but I want to go. I don't want to summarize that piece just yet. I want to go into a subtopic here that I think is quite interesting to show how, say, ancient wisdom we can interdisciplinarily apply it with what we know now about the world and kind of add on to, kind of use these ideas in contemporary settings in a somewhat useful way, or in a very useful way. So in chapter 2 of book 1 of The Art of Rhetoric, Aristotle starts laying out the modes of persuasion, which we still talk about today: ethos, pathos, and logos, this classic, Aristotelian triangle, the modes of persuasion, or say the ways, the channels in which, excuse me, we can be persuaded. And so the three means of effecting persuasion, what does he write? Aristotle writes, the man who is to be in command of them must, it is clear, be able to reason logically. There's our logos. To understand human character and goodness in their various forms. There's our ethos, character. And to understand the emotions, that is, to name them and describe them, to know their causes and the way in which they are excited. This is just a few, say, sections into chapter 2 of book 1, whereby he's already laid out of the modes of persuasion furnished by the spoken word. And now we apply these concepts to text and written word and video and all sorts of things now because they're useful. But back then, right, we don't have YouTube and that sort of thing. So primarily, we're talking about spoken word, and the oral tradition goes back very far. We know that, much further than the written tradition. And language, maybe, some of our records go back like somewhere around 8 to 10,000 years, and say musical instruments go back, we've dated to at least 30,000 years, and say cave paintings as well. So it's likely that there's other types of writing, and certainly a rich oral tradition that precedes writing by quite a bit. And we know Plato was a little bit skeptical of writing. He thought it might influence our memory. Not dissimilar to now, how we have, say, arguments against social media or the internet, or say Google. And some of the science on that is pretty interesting, the way that Google kind of remaps the memory of our minds. If we know we can find information somewhere, we might not actually remember it. But so Aristotle lays out the three modes of persuasion. The first depends on the personal character of the speaker. There's your ethos. The second on putting the audience into a certain frame of mind. That's pathos there, emotion. The third on the proof or apparent proof provided by the words or the speech itself. That's your logos, your logic. So I want to talk mostly about pathos here and think about this, because we know quite a bit about emotional intelligence, and emotional intelligence can be a really good predictor of income, much better than, say, IQ can, because you have to navigate complex social systems to make a decent income. And businesses and companies are highly matrixed, and society is rather complicated, and especially if you live in a city, there's a lot going on. You kind of have to you have to learn how to get around and figure out how to live in these complex sort of interpersonal situations. But also, of course, companies now often, especially these social media companies, I've been talking about this a little bit, they hire expert teams of psychologists to design, say, even they'll study what is the most pleasing notification sound that Facebook can produce, such that it gives you a little bit of dopamine rush and you want to come back for more and get more notifications. So really sophisticated and granular and detailed studies. I'm getting sick here, I apologize. Universities are germ factories, and they do good things too, but they also harbor a lot of viruses and bacteria. But I wanted to talk about, to understand the emotions. So this is straight from Aristotle. To understand the emotions, that is, to name them and describe them. So then let's go forward today. We've we've kind of mapped out human emotion in some practical ways, and it's actually really useful to name your emotions and to understand them to gain control of yourself better in the world, or to kind of and this is part of, say, maybe, and I'm not a psychologist by training, but I like to read psychological literature. This is part of this kind of coming out of this stem of what do we want to say, mindfulness methodologies and this sort of thing. It's like stepping back a little bit and trying to observe ourselves, and that's a nice way. So I'm looking at, I might say this wrong, but Plutchnik's wheel of emotions. So if you want, while you're watching this video, you can bring this up, do a quick Google image search, say, or DuckDuckGo, or whatever the search engine is that you use. And it's a really nice map. I'm sure it's not, I'm always skeptical of heuristics and these kinds of mappings because I don't think that they're perfectly inclusive, and they might not be universally applicable for everybody. And we know that there can be some variation across humans, but most humans are, even though we have our idiosyncrasies and our individuality, there are some universal traits that humans have. Academics don't like to admit that very often, I don't think, but so these are, the claim is kind of, here's a wheel of emotions, and you can identify ecstasy, admiration, terror, amazement, grief, loathing, rage, vigilance. It's formulated differently too, perhaps, as I've seen a couple of these different wheels, and I haven't read the Plutchnik, but it seems to be a widely used wheel. You go out a level, and you also have joy, trust, fear, surprise, sadness, anticipation, anger, and disgust, and I've seen one or the other at the center of the wheel. And so these are fairly universal emotions. Joy, right? In between joy and trust, there's love, perhaps a combination of these. It's almost like a color wheel, right? If you combine, combine blue and yellow, you get green, and that's kind of what it's getting at here, is if you combine these fundamental emotions, you get something in between them. Grief and amazement create, say, disapproval, or grief and terror create surprise, perhaps. I'm probably not reading this perfectly correctly. I'm not a psychologist by training, but nonetheless, my point here being is it can pay to educate yourself and try to observe and study what are the emotions that occur in your life, and then also to realize that these are the modes through which, or say, your emotions can be, I want to say, tampered with, but these are that might not be quite the right terminology. These are the emotions that can be elicited out of you through, say, advertising or film or so on and so on. And we'll talk later about the persuasive power of narrative. It's important in Hauser's understanding of rhetoric and mine too. But nonetheless, we can kind of label our emotions, right? I mean, anticipation and joy, and you have anxiety, and what is that, right? It's useful to kind of think about, like, what are these feelings that you have, and then how are they related physiologically too. It's like, I like the classic video game example. It's like, if you look at Mario Bros, they did something, the Mario Brothers, the original one on the Nintendo Entertainment System, they did a really nice thing with the music, where they go to cut time or half time when your countdown timer's running out. I think if you're in the last last minute or something, the last 100 seconds or something on the countdown timer. I don't think it goes by 60s. It's not seconds, but if you're under 100 time left and you start out with 300 or 400 time per stage, you're going from left to right trying to get to the end post. As a kind of set the groundwork for classic platformers that are still developed today as a kind of mechanic, right? But when you start running out of time and you haven't completed the stage yet, the music speeds up. And that creates a physiological response in you. Like your adrenal gland might actually secrete some, because the tempo is increased, and your palms might start sweating and this sort of thing. So it's like we have these really we have reactions to reality and reactions to media that are based in millions and hundreds of millions of years of evolutionary history, and also in this sophisticated kind of emotional space, we can be worked over by advertisements and media and film and video and thought and speech and text and all these different media that can kind of work us over and get us to, say, respond in an emotional manner, like television commercials. Subaru, I had a Subaru for a long time, and it was a great vehicle, but their advertising campaigns over the last, say, 5 years or something have been pretty emotionally jarring on their television campaigns, and they repurpose the videos for online, digital media too. It's like you see these collisions, really jarring collisions, vehicular collisions, and that plays into fear and terror. And then they say, well, the Subaru, it saved your life or whatever. I don't remember the copywriting on that ad campaign, but it plays off of fear. And Ford's done campaigns like this too. They push the safety features on their vehicles because a lot of people will buy a new vehicle after an accident. It's out of a place of fear. So I thought I would introduce this, just kind of combining some, say, contemporary ideas about mapping out our emotions, this emotional wheel, and applying it back, grabbing some ideas back in time from Aristotle and seeing what we can do with it. And I think it's a kind of a useful exercise, is, say, looking at how and describing, like Aristotle recommended, say, describing and understanding actually what our emotions are is a useful tactic, so that you can be more persuasive, so you can attempt to elicit specific emotional responses from your audiences if you're designing media or speaking or something, and also so you can better understand, as an audience member or a listener or a consumer of media, how you might be reacting to various media and how that text or that speaker is working you over. So that's enough for now. I'm coming down with the cold, but we're gonna stick through it here. Use a lot of hand sanitizer and take care of yourselves. We're in fall now. I'm recording this in mid-September 2019, and this is flu season and the cold weather and everything else, and the coming together of people is spreading of germs and all the bacteria and viruses going around, and I fell victim to it. So we're gonna keep going. But all right, thanks for tuning in, talking about pathos in a kind of what do we want to say, detailed and specific sort of way, where we're being very descriptive about the types of emotions, right? The varying, being very descriptive of the actual emotions that are within the, say, normal range of human experience and perhaps somewhat the universal human experience. What are these emotions that we feel? Not that we can perfectly map this out, but some of these wheels are pretty instructive and useful in thinking about specificity of emotion in terms of rhetoric. So take care of yourselves. Have a good day.